All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 2, Session 6 of the Imris Saga, a Monday session. We're going to be doing one extra session a week for a little bit, not of the main game, but as I mentioned at the end of last session, we will be doing some bonus games. Different days depending on the game, so make sure you're in the Discord to get up to date on that, or of course you can follow us on Twitch and get notifications if that is your choosing. But today I am joined by Marisa, Charlie, and Jack to jump into some more character-focused stuff as we've been doing. I'm going to start with Will.
Okay. I didn't think it was going to start with Will. I'm going to get back into that character quickly.
Will, you've spent, about a week, maybe a little bit more, in Talanthagon doing your various research of all these scrolls that you've been given, and relaxing, hanging out with Kella, teaching Kella, and whatnot. But you had resolved to go home, at least briefly, utilizing the Suthana's teleportation magics, or what magics they have at their disposal, rather. And you've kind of been keeping in contact with Sulveran, Uba as well, trying to figure out when they're going to arrive in the mountains so that you can join them. And about a week and a half into this, you think if you're going to visit your old home, now would be the time. By the time you're done with that, it will probably be time to go to the mountains and meet with Sulveran. Are you bringing anybody with you when you go?
Well, Will certainly, I think in the last session that I played, Will probably said to Kala that she would introduce her to her parents. So Kala definitely, and probably Kella, because of the nature of the apprenticeship, travel is always good, getting experience with teleportation, things like that. And Will is really trying to instill, particularly after the last conversation, where Kella didn't feel like she necessarily deserved to be counted as part of their group in being useful, is really trying to instill that mantra that Will herself has of everybody that goes into every part of an adventure is is an important part of it. So taking Kella to see where her family live, and her father's a blacksmith and stuff, and that town is just a town of the most normal people, probably helps that. Yeah, so them.
Works for me. So you gather whatever preparations you think you're going to want or need for this trip. Before too long, you find yourself standing in a teleportation circle, which the attendant has told you they're going to send you to Twinport, and you'll have to hitch carriage, walk, however you want to get to the rest of the way, because that's the closest teleportation circle available to them. Having made these preparations, the air spins around you. You feel, as you are teleported, it's a slightly different feeling than when you dimension door or something like that, when you jump a short distance. This feels as though you're hanging in the air for several seconds, and light of a multitude of colors just rushing past you before you blink again and find yourself standing in a much colder room, serviced by a human attendant who kind of just marks down your coming. They hand you a small token, and will inform you. You could use that for a return trip. Just bring it on down.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So, and she pockets it to them. It'll be a few days, but then she kind of nods and is like, well, this conversation's already done, and I'm just talking for the sake of talking now, so she just starts to move on.
Your tenant just nods and continues on with their day. So you find yourself in Twinport, a city that you are very familiar with, although Kala has maybe been here once. Kala, of course, has never been here. And as you're exiting this building, the building that the teleportation circle is housed in here is kind of this public use facility. It's adjacent to the mayor's building in the upscale part of Twinport, closer to the ocean side rather than the still sea side. There's a hustle and bustle about. This city is much, it's a little bit, though you're in the nicer part of the city, as you move away from it, there is a much more rough and tumble quality, more obvious social strata here than in Tel Fagan, or even Karad, for that matter. Though you also see a lot of wealth on display here as people ride by you in fanciful carriages, led by horses or at times more exotic animals. There's also plenty of people on the streets, most of which pay as little attention to you as they can as they make their way along. I think unless you wanted to do something here, you kind of just strike out of the city pretty quickly.
Other than Will, before getting to Twinport, even before getting onto the teleportation circle, took literally everything that she had that was of any value, like any gold she had, any gems she had, anything that would be pickpocketable, and she put that into Alfred because she doesn't want to be pickpocketed of money, but trusts. Well, probably also explain to Kala that sometimes you want to be more protective of your money, but just trusts Kala to look after her own stuff. But yeah, I think Will is very much of the opinion that walking to Breakers Hill is the right choice because people showing up there in carriages is not normal, and she doesn't see herself to be such an opulent person as to show up to her hometown in a carriage.
I'm actually going to move us to the campaign so we can. It doesn't take too long to load, you guys. It's for the stream. So we are at the very eastern edges of Imris proper, this area that you all call home here in Twinport, one of the 3 largest cities on the continent. Probably the second in terms of just sheer size, but not necessarily the most dense. You do have to walk for several hours before you kind of leave the city behind, and even then, there's still buildings here and there, the occasional inn or tavern, kind of on the very outstretches of this city. But you're heading north, kind of along the coastline, and you travel for about a day and a half, stopping at some inn along the way before you reach your hometown. You see, as you kind of crest over a small hill, it laid out much the same as you ever remember the last time you were here and the time before that. There's maybe one new building since you last were here some time ago. When was the last time you were home, actually? I think we never really established that.
I think probably. How long has this whole journey been going on, the campaign?
It's been about 3 months. I had to double check that for Sulveran.
Maybe around 2 years, maybe a little bit more. It's it's getting past 2 years now, because a year of that was her captaincy, and then before that she'd been serving for a little bit since she last went home. But yeah, her mum was just getting sick then, so she probably, there's a moment as they're like approaching this town, and on the top of this one hill, there's like a pair of trees on either side of the road coming in, and she like walks past one, and there's just a swipe. It just like is a deep cut into this tree that she made as she left, and she like drags her. She has to like lean down a little bit, but she drags her fingertip along it, and it's like a memory of her leaving, nearly 20 years ago now. And there's like, she mentions to Keller, she's like, "I made that when I left, and I was 12." Because you know, even small cuts last for a long time. And she's like so melancholy in this moment, and has been melancholy like the whole time. Because coming back here is like returning to the scene of what she considers to be her biggest failure as a person. Like, she was 12, and there's so many logical parts of her brain that are like, a 12-year-old makes bad choices, but this was a particularly bad one that hurt like the people that mattered the most to her for a very long time. So she's like very quiet and contemplative as she's walking. She probably just leads them straight through the town to. You can probably feel that heat emanating through this town from the forge as soon as you're like walking towards it. Because it used to be a forge and a bakery that used the heat of the forge to like cook bread as well.
Yeah, as you're kind of heading into town, you pass by some people, most of which you recognize, but they kind of only vaguely remember you. You know, they kind of remember you as a kid being a little bit rambunctious, but then you spent so long away that by the time you came back, most people forgot, for the most part, about you, or at least didn't recognize you. But as you're coming back through, a couple people wave, kind of remembering whose kid you are. But nobody really stops to say anything to you. You enter. You don't enter in actually, but as you come close to the house, you do start to hear that very old sound that you remember very distinctly from your childhood. The ding, ding, of the sort of beat of a hammer on some metal, meaning that your father is probably around back through the old sort of a small wooden gate that leads to the forge.
The bakery half is closed still.
Yeah, it seems you can see the sign is still up, but the open sign has not been flipped on. So the wood on that as well is fading. You can see that it doesn't look like people have been using that door very much lately.
Has Will's dad been keeping the like windows clean?
Yeah, the house looks in like good order. It's just like the weathering on the steps is noticeably old. It doesn't have that like fresh, like it's been scraped by new feet within the last couple of years very much. It's all like, more old weathering.
Yeah. Will like takes just this deep breath. There's probably like hesitancy in her step when the sound of the forge hit, and then like looking at the front of this bakery, there's just this huge like deep breath and like a really slow letting out of, almost in between a sigh and just like exhaling to try and get past the moment that she's in. But she like starts nodding and then just starts walking around to the back to the forge and lets herself in.
Okay, as you head back, you see, or not see, but we see rather, Kella and Kella kind of standing next to each other, following you in, like looking very much like they don't know what's going to happen exactly, or they're a little bit along for the ride, just trying to be there for you. But you come around to see your father, a little bit older than last you saw him, but still the bulky blacksmith build, turned away from you at the moment, as he seems to be working on something simple. It looks like it's probably going to be a horseshoe or something like that. You can see him starting to take a flat bar and bend it on a round with precise hammer strikes.
Will like kind of crouches down and murmurs to Keller and is like explaining in a detail that probably both Keller and Keller are surprised. Like every aspect of what he's doing, like she knows every single word and every like moment that it will happen. She like knows his rhythm so perfectly, even like 20 years later, that she can kind of start giving Keller a slight education in how this like whole thing works and why stuff happens that way. But we'll just wait for him to finish.
Yeah. You see him with a pair of tongs push the now looking much more like a horseshoe piece of metal back into these hot coals, covering it and pulling on a bellow before looking around and finally seeming to notice the group of you. He kind of turns, hammer in hand, and starts to say something, almost thinking that you're somebody else before he like pauses and looks at you. He says, "Oh, uh, Willow. Sorry, we weren't expecting you. Kind of like definitely caught off guard in this moment.
I think she nods, like understanding that she could have told him that she was coming and like didn't. And nods, and I think she's probably since getting sending been in more contact with him than ever before. Like she's been trying to keep it up, but she didn't say that she was coming, and says she nods and like is walking towards him and says, I just had the time and I didn't really think about. I should have told you that I was coming. And by the time she reaches him, I think she just like puts her arms around him and like start give him a hug. And like it's very. She's quite tall, but he is a little bit taller still and broader. And it's very like she hugs him the way that a young child hugs their father. It's like that's the memory that she like harnesses in these moments. And she says, I came to see how you were both doing. It's like talking into his lower like jaw.
Yeah, he's kind of like, you know, almost mirroring you. Like has his very large, very calloused hands, like one very gently resting on the back of your head, and the other one like pulling you in closer. Um, he says, it's so good to see you. I'm sorry, I just assumed since you've been messaging me that me. Um, he like looks past you finally. Oh, who are your friends? You're going to introduce your old man.
Will smiles. I think Will knows. Will has definitely mentioned both Kala and Keller, but like her dad is quite like Will. Like Will is definitely a direct line from her dad more than her mum, and is a. Oh, of course. How could I not introduce? This is my girlfriend Kala, and gestures to Kala, and gives her like a very fond smile. And this is my apprentice Keller, Calandra.
Well, you've been gone for 2 years and you've already picked up a future wife and a sort of daughter.
Oh no! Again, apprentice. You've had apprentices, surely, in your time.
Oh, sure, but I mean, for the good ones, it's really two steps between, so to speak.
Will laughs a bit and like still is like has her arm slightly around him. It's like has opened up to say that and say, I don't have an enormously long amount of time to stay. Oh,
Oh,
I could have
sure.
longer. I suppose I could leave from here. she's like, she does a thing that she never does with anybody else around, where she like vocalizes her thought process when her parents are around. Like the rest of the time, it's all internal, and like now it's like I'm vocalizing this because this is like my home, even
Well,
though the town doesn't think of her as a denizen.
sure. He says, "Oh well, I hope you can stay at least until dinner. Your mom's feeling well enough that she did some baking today. Well, doing some baking. She's inside. Um, and both to Kella and Kella, they're seeing him like he comes across as being like a very friendly, but like in this moment, he seems to be a little bit more flustered than they think otherwise. In appearance, he looks a lot like Will in terms of like not face shape, but more like features. Like his hair is red, although it's flecked with a lot of like gray and white, especially around the temples. And his hair is cut pretty short. But like in terms of facial appearances, he is like very like hard cut angles. Like you would think that somebody like beat his face into shape almost, because of how the way it looks. Um, but he says, "Oh, he looks back at the forge for a second and pulls out the horseshoe because he doesn't want it to get too hot. He says, "Why don't you bring yourselves inside, and I'll be right in. I just want to finish this before I stop for today."
Will nods and says, I think I can probably stay for a day or two. If you have more things to finish today, I won't be going anywhere immediately."
Oh, okay, it's no problem. I've got a few orders, but I just want to finish this thing so that the metal doesn't cool. But after that, we can talk. Maybe he kind of looks at the other two. Maybe play a game of cards or something. I think I
Will
saw the
nods
deck somewhere.
vigorously to cards and says, "Hey, and if you need a hand at some point while I'm here, you can borrow Keller to work your bellows."
Kelly's like, "Ooh, I like glass. Well, she's a bit scrawny like you, but we always made that work. So sure."
Will is not offended by that because it's accurate. It says, "All right, I'll go see. I'll go inside." And like, it's really visible that she like steels herself far more than when she walked in here. She like did a sigh because she's like being home, but like this is she steels herself to walk inside to something that like she has no idea like
Yeah.
what that.
As you do this, your father's like hand touches your shoulder for a moment, and he like leans in, and before he was like flustered but happy, he gets a little bit like grave in this moment in the face and says, "I know it's only been 2 years, but well, just be ready."
She nods and smiles and says, looks at the horseshoe that he pulled out and says, "I traveled with a priest of Cordal who was talking about. I can't think of it as Jack right now, but
Sure.
like a new way of like riveting into a thing. And I'll give Will gives her dad bardic inspiration to like finish the horseshoe."
Oh, well, give it a go. As he goes back to ting 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 ting, and he starts to give like very curt orders to Kella, and they are orders. He's not like in this moment he has stopped being your friendly father, and
Yeah.
he is the master blacksmith, and he's like, "Right, girl, go to the bellows, start pumping. We need to get to work here."
Will smiles at Keller and like will take Keller inside.
You enter in, and the house is as you remember it 2 years ago. Not that much has changed. All the furniture is in the same places. The smith's shop kind of goes almost directly into the living room. So there's a fireplace off to your right, near where the bakery is, kind of conjoined with the forge as well, uh, in this sort of one big giant chimney coming up out of the roof. And you know your mother is, or if she's baking, then she would be off to the right. And as you enter in, you do smell bread, maybe some vanilla, honey, lots of those kinds of scents in the air. Uh, Turning the corner, you see your mother, far thinner than you ever remember her looking. Her kind of, especially in the neck and cheeks, it's very thin, and you can see her eyes are sunken. But that doesn't betray the brightness in them as she turns to look at you, coming home again. And you can see her hands slip, and she drops. She was holding kind of platter, kind of like a cookie sheet, that had a couple loaves on it. But as she turns to your entrance, she like immediately her hand gives out.
Can I try and catch them with my spellbook mage hand?
Sure. You make a sleight of hand check with your charisma bonus.
Oh, cool. All right, this is going to be an extra +3 then.
Okay.
I've loved the thievery, so it's less than that. It should be 24.
Okay. I mean, you roll an 18, so yeah, it wasn't that difficult.
Yeah.
You almost reach out with your own hand, but the mage hand like flicks out farther as it kind of arrests the fall, and like has to do a little jimmy to stop the bread from sliding around. But she looks down and then looks at you. She says, "Oh, um, Willow, we weren't expecting you. I guess I'm glad I caught up this morning."
Will smiles and this in the same way. This time she's not speaking, but in the same way, like crosses the room, using the mage hand, just deposits the loaves on the counter nearby and embraces her mother. And says, "Well, I'm bad at letting you know when I'm coming home. So
Worse
never
at
going
telling
to
us.
change, I think."
Worse at telling us when you're leaving. Glad to see you, and your father was telling me this is one of your new friends, I suspect. Maybe Kala.
Yes, this is Kala, and this time Will waves Kala over to be closer because Will knows a lot of the symptoms of fatigue and just being far less losing so much of your energeticness, but isn't sure how that affects eyes and stuff. And it's waves Kala over and says, "Yes, this is Kala, my partner, and I thought it was appropriate that I introduce you all."
Um, well, certainly, and she gives a slow kind of curtsy as best that she can, in her condition. But Will takes Kala's hand. Takes Kala's hand, and says, "Oh, why don't you? I was just finishing up some things. When the both of you could help me, and then we can sample some of the wares as the young one over here always likes to do."
Will looks suitably ashamed of the bread thievery of her childhood, and but Will immediately takes off her jacket and the spellbook unhooks from her hand and serpentines up around her shoulder instead, to give her so as to not get flour on itself. And she immediately starts helping, as she did many years ago.
Yeah, and your mother immediately pulls out more flour, more salt, more yeast, etc. Now that she has two strong sets of hands to knead the dough, which you suspect, looking at the half kneaded piece on the counter, was the thing that she was having the most trouble with, in continuing to bake. The two of you spend, a half hour or so under the diligent instructions of your mother, kneading dough, mixing in things, having a couple taste tests before two more loaves and a couple pies are set into the warm oven connected to the forge outside. All the while, you can hear the ting, 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 that you remember so well from your childhood, and the occasional sound of your father's laugh as he's saying something that he thinks is funny. You're sure.
Ella's gonna learn the worst jokes.
All the while, your mother is chatting to you, telling you about like, so and so in the village got married, and their kids are, one of them's pregnant. They're expected. Da, 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 da. Everybody's been helping out since I haven't been able to bake, which has been nice. Kind of just chatting about simple things, the village life. The flowers that are blooming out on the hill nearby, stuff like that, stuff that brings you back to simpler times living here at Breaker's Hill. But eventually she turns the conversation, as she's wont to do, back towards you, asking you about your latest adventures. I think she knows that you're no longer working captaining a ship. But she, 25 words is not very much to explain, all the stuff that you have been doing. So she's interested. Yeah. She wants to know how you met Kala, how you met Kella, all your other companions, etc.
Kala gets to see Will, because Will tells it like any child would tell to their parent, like, diminish the danger, except for when like it's clear that like everything was fine, and like Will actually talks about her own role and stuff, which even with Kala, Will doesn't really talk that much about what she does. She always talks about like everybody else. But Will like embellishes this story and tells it like someone would tell a saga. And tells like basically the whole story all the way through, and it probably takes. I think that Will tell the story starting at the very beginning of leaving the ship to her mum, and it goes all the way through sampling the bread and then through the eventual dinner. That Will continues this story up until like quite late in the night when Will is finishes with and then we walked into Breaker's Hill.
Yeah, by this time, Hilla had come back. Your father. Speaking of which, this is something I totally forgot to ask you. What are your parents' names? If you thought about this at all.
I didn't, but her dad's name is Thade, Thade.
Yeah.
And her mum's name is Fern, which Willow is called Willow.
Thade comes back in with Killa looking positively filthy. Got the dust from the charcoal, smelling of smoke and all of that, good stuff. As your mother kind of makes them go and wash up in a little basin that you guys have. It's like fairly nice. It's like a copper washing basin. There's not running water here, but they make do. Because your family was decently well off, blacksmith and the baker.
Yeah, they had
good
two incomes where most families in Baker still have one. So they were doing okay.
As you're telling the story, your father kind of just comes and sits in, not really saying anything, as dinner is being served as you're continuing to tell the story, as long as it takes. But eventually, once it all wraps up, you guys are kind of sitting all at the fireplace, feeling very full, with good warm food. Certainly better than, if not more fancy than the Suthanas, more filling to taste buds. Um, at some point, your mother says, "So, what are you going to be doing next? I suppose."
Oh, well, I'm meant to go meet one of our other companions, in the mountains, but, Will, like, pulls out the other half of the rod and says, it's, an easy magical thing. And then after that, I think we're going to, go rescue Kala's mentor.
So fancy, so grand. Burnt says, mostly directed at like Kala, like trying to help talk you up a little bit. Uh, even though you both know you don't need it.
Uh,
She kind of says, "Well, that's just lovely."
can
Coughing
I,
again, as she does every so often.
make a medicine check, having spent many hours observing my mother?
Yeah, go ahead.
That 18's good.
Me too. 18-0. Um, she's definitely gotten worse since you last saw. Like, it wasn't that bad 2 years ago when you left. Like, she hadn't been sick that long. There would be periods still, just because of like your father relating this to you, where she couldn't, like, it was bad and she couldn't really get out of bed or do anything. Um, but she seems like at this moment like she's having a good day. You think, but you can tell it's almost like she just isn't capable of getting enough nutrition or something like that. Um,
Mm.
like something about it is not letting her uh, process foods correctly, or otherwise, like just her body isn't doing that normal process. So it just looks like she's basically been slowly being progressively starved, basically over 2 years. Um,
Mm.
so she looks, frail. She's got like this occasional cough that happens. You think probably because her lungs are a bit weak, and
Mm.
you imagine that's like following through for the rest of her organs. You can't imagine that at this rate she has more than say a year to 6 months, depending on like how whether it like spikes. If she has a really bad day 3 months from now, it could be sooner, but
All right. No, we'll note that in to tell to the Sithana surgeon and maybe ask them to come visit sooner rather than later. Um, but then I think as everything's winding down, I think Will says to her mother, I'm going to be here until I am summoned, essentially. Would you direct me tomorrow and I'll bake and I'll open the bakery?
uh, of course, I'll help you. We'll get everything ready, and we'll
You can direct Kella, and I, and
maybe Kella can go to the rest of the town and tell everybody that we're open in the morning. And
Will smiles.
if if your friends want to stay while you go to the mountains and then head back the other way, but they're more than welcome.
Will kind of looks at Kella and says, if Kella is happy to look after Kella's education while I'm briefly gone and stay, we'll discuss it. He doesn't want to put Kella on the spot to be like, hey, in front of my mum, say no to that offer.
She nods. Oh, yes, of course. I don't want to. I don't want to impose.
Will smiles. Will probably did tell Kalla that Will has never brought home another partner. Like Kalla is the first partner that Will's ever brought back.
Right.
Um,
For her part, Kella seems to really like your family. Um,
yeah, they're lovely.
yeah.
Like they're literally the best people that Will just like savagely hurt.
He
Um,
sorry, go ahead.
no, that's fine.
I think at that point, like you guys kind of wind down into your father at least will have some ciders as you guys play cards, and the night eventually wanes before people go to bed. Um, there aren't quite enough rooms for uh for like you all to sleep separately. So Kella probably has to, you get your old room. Kella sleeps on the couch.
Yeah. Um, Once everybody else has gone to bed, Will probably gets up, and despite this town not having any fondness for her, she does have a fondness for this town. And every time she comes here, she probably like wanders the streets quite late. Uh, but in this case, is taking a piece of paper to the general store and um, asking for a delivery as early as possible of flour to because Will assumes that her mum doesn't have enough flour to open the bakery to sell bread to the town. Uh, so asks for a delivery of like a half amount because Will is realistic about her baking prowess uh, to be delivered as early as possible and slides it under the general store door.
Okay. Um, as you return, Kala is kind of sitting up reading a book. Um, though I think she was probably sleeping when you had left, but was awoken by your leaving. Although didn't tell you because they don't want to be like, oh, you woke me up kind of thing. But as you come back in, she says, a nice moonlight stroll.
Will smiles and says, "It's hard during the day to not be a part of the town. They're all gracious and friendly, of course, but I used to run around and everybody is your family in this town, and I'm not that. But the town itself reminds me of home, so I also had to order flour."
I never quite understood why you were so hard on yourself about leaving until I spent the day with your parents.
Hmm. Everybody that runs away from home does it for a reason, and mine was selfish and not a good one. But it led me here. I wouldn't have met you had I not run away an amount of years ago that I don't really want to think of right now. Uh, have picked up Keller. But, lives are different. There's a version of me somewhere that stayed at home and is running the bakery now and is married to the person that my father apprenticed in the forge and is living a very happy life, I'm sure.
Well, despite that, I'm glad that you did leave. Um, I think Kella likes it here. I'm happy to stay for a little bit longer while you take care of business. That way, you're not you can help your friend. You don't have to watch out for the two of us.
Will Will smiles and says, yes, the people. I have very little doubt that you'd be fine looking after Keller, and Keller probably would be nearing being fine looking after herself. But Will takes out the token and says, if you do get called back for some reason, Melf or one of the others, or the Suthana contacts, uh, you can always walk back to Twinport and
Okay.
take the teleportation.
Yeah, we can always get a horse and be there within the day. I'm sure.
Will smiles and says, well, I'm glad that my family likes you and that you like them. Would like to be around a little bit more eventually.
Maybe after this is all over, whenever that is, we can. I'll build a tower out here. there will be a wizard's tower then in this small little village.
Will smiles, and as she's smiling, she like pulls out a little stool from under her bed, and she's like looking at Keller the whole time and walks the stool over into the corner, stands on the stool, not needing it quite as much as she might have when she was a child, and reaches up to like one of the wooden beams, support beams in this room, and like reaches on top of it, and you can hear the sound of something sliding across. And then she reaches further, and there's this really dusty, half-drunk bottle of some kind of alcohol that Will, as a very young child, had been given by one of her like not well-behaved relatives, like her uncle probably, and pulls it down and blows it off and says, "Last time I had a drink of this, I was 11, and I was violently ill." She like,
Oh, certainly can't taste any better.
I don't know that it tasted bad, but it might not have been the first. Maybe it's scrum. And Will like looks at it, shakes it. There's no sediment in it, but like it shakes in a really like molassesy way that is like slightly less liquid than it should be. But she
it's like
grabs
somewhat evaporated.
Yeah, she grabs like 1 cup from her thing and pours a small amount for them each to try, just to see what it's like.
It's absolutely disgusting. That
would make sense also from like Will's like uncles. So.
It probably didn't taste that great to begin with, but in the time it's been sitting here, it was stored, like you shut it again, and it's in like a dry, cool place. A dark, cool place rather. But it's just not the kind of liquor that's meant to keep like that. So it's a little bit turned to vinegar and not great tasting.
Will likes it slightly more than would be expected, because like she's definitely drunk worse on like a Gathite chip sometime, but she like recoils from it a little bit and says, "Maybe it was very bad back then."
Well, children never know.
Will looks at it and says, "I'm going to add some wine to this and gift it to somebody that I don't like."
Oh no.
Thinking about like how to do that.
I think with that, you guys kind of, you sit up talking for a little bit longer before drifting off to sleep. The next morning, you wake up finding a couple sacks of flour as well as some other, random and baking ingredients sitting outside on the porch with like a small note next to them that just says like, pay me back later. Sorry, go ahead.
When Will sends Keller out to like spook the bakery being open today, we'll also send a pouch of gold to the general store with Keller.
Okay.
But yeah, like just rolls up her sleeves, starts baking. She's today using her spell scroll as like an extra kneading hand because she is quite weak as well. So, but yeah, mainly doesn't let her mum do very much for like the bulk baking, but is like asking for help everywhere because she doesn't have an enormous amount of skill in this.
Yeah, she's kind of like standing. She has found a small step stool so that she can see over you, and although she probably doesn't need to see over Cal's head, but just so she'd see over your guys' heads while standing kind of roughly in the center of the room, and is directing you. Oh, you're pinching it too hard. You gotta eat and a little bit more water. No, too much. A little flour, just a pinch. There you go. Just perfect. Okay, now we'll put that in the oven. Gotta wait for 2 hours. That stuff still needs to rise. Don't touch it. Etc.
Will eventually puts Keller on like the scoring the bread duty, so gives her a very sharp knife and just says, "Do something artistic on top of each one." And Will like just shows her 3 slices across the top.
Do like a swirl and like an X. try to roughly make a fish.
Fish bread, that's the best bread. But yeah, would you like me to make a roll?
Yeah, you can
to
have advantage because you're helping.
Is it intelligence?
Sure.
1 plus 4. Jack of all trades, so 5. Certainly not at her mum's level, but it is bread that's edible.
Okay. For me.
15. I rolled.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that on the stream. Yeah, that's fine. Weird. Yeah, you spend like the whole day just baking. You start early, setting some stuff out to rise while you're getting some other stuff ready. Kella goes out and like tells basically the whole town, and before too long in the afternoon, like basically by the time the first batch is done, you have people like coming to buy bread and to chat up Fern and like ask her, oh, how she's doing. Is the bakery going to be open for a while, or just for just for today? She does the other half of the baker, which is chatting with all the guests, learning about gossip while they're doing these exchanges, ringing people up. And you guys sell basically everything that you make. Not necessarily as soon as it comes out, but pretty quickly. You kind of suspect that the town, the word was spread around like, hey, the bakery's open. We should all go buy stuff to help them out. And also because it tastes really good. So by the end of this, you're feeling you actually have to go out and get more flour at one point, or probably Kella will do that. But by the end of this, you're feeling a little bit tired, and like ready to sleep. And it's probably around that time that you will hear a message spell sounding in your head, and we will swap back over to the other two. I drag us back.
And Jack, did you still want notice of the party, or is this just the notice of coming to the?
I think Will Keller and Keller did come to the party at Uber's Keep, but I think that just happened off screen.
Yeah,
like it's a trap. Yeah, travel down there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, the messages, like just like the last message was far shorter than a sending needs to be. Sulveran's next message.
Oh, you muted yourself.
You muted yourself mid-sentence.
I thought that was me for a second. I was like, oh, what's going on?
I did.
Difficult thing.
I have no idea how that occurred. That's interesting. So yeah, it is just as utterly short as it can possibly be. In the foothills. If you plan to come, do so. Evening is fine.
You get just a response. It's like a really weak voiced, like a very weak voiced person saying like, okay. And Will, upon hearing that, is like, will like say her goodbyes to Keller and her mum, and then go out to her dad and say, I've got to go. I'll be back soon. I'll let you know. Maybe, probably not, but.
Well, as long as you come back, that's the important thing. Anything else?
He smiled.
Details.
I'm going to have the Suthana send a physician to look at Mum. I don't know if that will help, but she sighs again and says, all right, I've got to go. And she goes to her room and like sits there and just like starts openly crying for like a bit of like the stress.
Yeah.
Takes a little bit of time and will like appear maybe 5 minutes later. I don't know how the warp thing works, but I like the idea that it connects to Sulveran's space and Will's just like holding on to the end of it.
Yeah, that's probably exactly how it works. Sulveran just kind of looks down at the rod, looks slightly more up, but still down at will, and then releases the rod so that she can take it, since she normally handles these things. Did she wipe up her face, or does she still look like somebody who was crying 5 minutes?
Well, she looks like somebody that spent the last 10 hours in front of a hot oven covered in flour, and also like she was potentially crying.
So,
I think
uh,
I just tried to show the warp anchor real quick.
Yeah, I've got it in my thing. Like the teleport happens, but yeah, Will looks tired and like pretty haggard and not super great.
So Sulveran, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say. So, as we kind of rejoin the two parties, Uba and Sulveran, you guys had waited in the castle at Mael Lorath for a few more days after the ordeal with Leon and Lumon and the dragon, both for the feast that you threw, which of course Will was present for, and then 3 or 4 days after that, just to relax, and also because you had to wait for the clerics and other stuff that the Susanna was sending along with you to kind of catch up, get to the foothills. So you had like time to rest, since they're going to be traveling slower than you would have. But by this point in time, you guys have set off, picking whatever mounts you please, and then have headed up into the foothills. You guys are probably like 2 days away from where the tribe is supposed to be, assuming that they haven't moved yet, which, according to what Kalash told you, they shouldn't have quite yet. So that's kind of, you're deep, excuse me, deep into the mountains, into snow-covered peaks up off in the distance. You're kind of bundled up. It is very early spring. It's just past the equinox in Imris. So it is still quite cold up in these mountains, and you're surrounded by evergreens, excuse me, of all kinds, as Will kind of pops into existence next to Sulveran.
I think so. Sulveran, he looks strangely settled. He's wearing a fur that he has not worn before, but it's very loose around his shoulders. He hasn't quite bundled it thoroughly, as one might, because it's not as cold as it could be for him. So while he's bundled, he's not over bundled, and he looks at Will, and for a long moment he's quiet, as though he plans to say something, and then he just reaches out to squeeze her shoulder. I'm glad you came. And he turns to take a glance at Uba to see, just because every time they've been in this cold area, he's just like entertained by watching Uba.
Yeah,
I'm assuming that the drifts are big enough to capture her. Them.
Yeah, I think that Uba
Sure.
is like, you probably see like a snout just like going along, and that's probably all you can see above the snow. I also think that Uba has like not picked up at all that Will was having a difficult time, and is just like, yay, the rod worked. Let's go.
I also feel like Uba is like just covered in, like, they have like a coat that's like, just a little bit too big and extra furry around the hood and cuffs.
Yeah, they're wearing like 4 different cloaks. Like, it's too cold.
Also, I'm sure nobody caught that, but I misspoke. I meant Kalatka, not Kalasht. That is a different person.
But I felt it would be like, mockery, when I clearly know that you didn't mean the corpse sitting on the side of a hill somewhere.
Yeah, Will pats Sulveran's hand and with like a smile, and then looks to the sound of Uber's voice saying yay, and says, well, seems you two are not dead, which is good, although I suppose I knew that 5 minutes ago. Shall we go? I have been awake for a long time. So,
Sulveran's gonna nod. We can rest when you'd like. It is not so urgent that we travel quickly. From what the chieftain has told me, 2 days. And he kind of looks at the traveling party. He squints a little. Maybe 3. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff.
Will looks around and probably didn't really think about the fact that she's going to be teleporting into a bunch of people. Like, oh yeah. All right. Well, let's keep going. I'll let you know if I need a break. It's mainly my arms hurt. And Will starts telling them both about how she opened her parents' bakery and they've been baking bread all day. Keller started an apprenticeship as a blacksmith. It's going fine. All these things. It says, how is his lordship? To Uba.
Uba sighs very dramatically and says, "There's so much more to it than I thought. All of these intricacies and customs. It's exhausting." And will dramatically hand to the forehead.
Will smiled. I think they have talked a few times about the fact that they both essentially have an extremely similar title, but it functions really differently. And Will says, mine, I don't have that problem yet. Maybe it will be a problem for me when serious things are happening.
Uba laughs and then says, "I don't know if Sulveran's told you, but have I told you yet how we slayed the dragon?" And we'll probably launch into a very embellished tale of killing the dragon, and also Leon and Lumon as well.
Yeah, Will's heard this story several times, has met Leon and Lumon, but it's still very I like when Uba tells stories, so I'll do it. And Uba was drunk a lot of that time, I think.
Yeah, I think Uba probably forgets the entire party.
Yeah.
I
Sulveran's
think
version
that,
of the story is 4 words long.
yeah.
We killed a dragon.
Will very subtly prompts you for details that you have forgotten in the story, but not in a way that Uba can notice.
I don't want to shame Sulveran, but you could tell that story in 2 words if you were a real Gathite.
This is probably true.
You could tell that story in 1 tattoo if you were a real Gathite.
You could tell it in a good grunt if you were a true Gathite.
You all, as you finish the catching up in the little that you've done apart, all the while making out. It's definitely tough going because there aren't great roads here. So occasionally these wagons are kind of a little bit sturdier. They're they knew that you were going up to the mountain, so they're a little bit made for that. And you have really, really good horses that can, basically traverse at a maybe not a 90-degree angle, but a 70-degree angle if they need to. So you head upwards as you're going, and it does get even colder somehow as you move from snow-covered forests to snow-capped mountains, which are just covered. The horses are plowing through for you guys, but even the stuff that they're plowing through is still what they've left behind is still kind of tall snow for Uba. Uba, you probably stick to mostly trying to stay on a mount while you're up here.
Once it gets quite steep, Will just shakes her hands out and grabs her cloak and just starts flying, to not have to deal with walking up steep snow. It's she doesn't want to slow down this whole party, so she's I'll just fly near you. That's fine.
I would also like to imagine that Uba, because Uba hates horses, is probably in a saddlebag, because I'm assuming these horses are really big.
Yeah, it's
so Uba's just angrily pouting in a saddlebag.
Swarmer in there.
Sitting on
You're kind of huddled up with Kojin as well. two scaly heads kind of like sticking out occasionally.
This entire time, Sulveran is like either talking to clerics and explaining to them,
Mhm.
The nuances of his culture, or subtly teasing Uba by telling them stories of things that are definitely just like stories that you tell children back with his home. So he's not quite lying, but but some of it's valid, and he mixes that in. Like he explains like the grappling snows that if you step in them, they'll just take you under, and if you try to kill them, they will split into many. And
I think that Uba takes everything you say at 100% face value, and is like, Sovereign wouldn't lie.
yeah, that's exactly he's using his power for evil.
So, and speaking of the other people with you, there are 8 Elkar with you. There's 4 clerics, 1 each of Alamein, Parador, Karan, and Aramis. And they're all like mid-level in terms of like the organization of their respective religions. Clerics certainly capable of casting some, fairly powerful spells to the average person's mind. There's also a couple like guards accompanying them. They are also freezing their asses off. They're used to cold temperatures because the desert does get cold at night in the winter, but not, this snowy, this wet cold is not quite the same as that like dry, desert winter. And so they're kind of figuring out for the first time like how to avoid getting as much snow on you and warming up as much as possible as they can. But Sulveran is leading you along through what at a glance sometimes seems to be the more treacherous paths, but they'll kind of explain to you like, oh, we don't want to go that way because of this reason. That's gonna, that's more likely to cause avalanches that way. The rocks are less secure. We have to go this way for this reason. Kind of, you all get the sense that Sulveran's tribe has been here several times, and Sulveran's aware of the terrain. And after 2 days of this traveling, you find yourself at the peak in question to see a large number of tents arrayed together, as well as a number of these large Gathite kind of just standing out on guard, seemingly unperturbed by the cold weather, far less bundled up than anyone except for Sulveran.
And even Sulveran's probably a little bit more bundled up than them with his recent acclimatizing to the desert, etc.
Mm-hmm. As you all get like over this ridge with this procession, these wagons and everything, a couple of the tribe's warriors will jog up to you, just kind of plowing their way through the snow until they arrive to see Sulveran. I'll check something. They look at you, seemingly aware of the possibility of your arrival, and then glance at the rest of the party and say, the chieftain Kalatka has said that you are welcome within our tribe. Bird Speaker, he wishes to see you as soon as you can make yourself available.
Does Sulveran recognize these two?
You do know them, but they're not like people that you hung out with a lot. The person talking to you right now, his name is Halan, and he's just like one of the many warriors within the tribe, not even particularly noteworthy. But you do notice beyond that, some of the other tribe people have noted your arrival and kind of like peering out. curious about what's going on.
Yeah, so Sulveran is going to have already sort of prefaced to the group when they entered that it is best to be mindful of themselves and their weapons, and that even if they're welcomed, to keep in mind that there are not generally visitors to this clan, that he cannot recall a single time when such a procession entered his own clan. And so he will dip his head at Halan. Greetings. And just moves past him very deliberately, watching the whole clan as they step down the mountainside. In contrast to perhaps how Will had to gear herself up before she entered the door, Sulveran just kind of shifts his posture slowly as they enter. He becomes more straight-backed, more sturdy-shouldered, and something of the animation, even though he's always seemed to have a very passive face, he must have been emoting somehow, because even that has left his gaze as he walks into the encampment, just scanning to see who he recognizes and if anything has changed, if he can tell anything by, say, the positions of the tents, because he knows, for instance, the hides that one group would use to cover their tents, and if those have moved or if those are still there, that kind of thing.
I also think that Uba is falling behind you, but is lagging behind pretty significantly, as they are, lizard folk. Cold weather tends to slow down reptiles, so Uba is lagging significantly far behind you and is walking extremely slowly.
Will is with Uba to make sure that Uba doesn't create what Will would consider to be a diplomatic incident.
The
new lord.
So you guys are kind of walking in. You can hear behind you Halan speaking to the Alcar about what they've brought, and starting that process of figuring out what they have to trade, stuff like that. Yes.
Will would also have very respectfully inclined her head to the two that had met our party. In Gathite, offered what the tribe she traveled with would have considered to be a thank you for welcoming us to your lands, basically. To try and be as she was taught by the tribe that she was a part of, this is how you should enter a thing.
Sure. You hear Halan will respond in turn in Gathite. And we've talked about this before. The Gathite that you speak is slightly different than Sulveran. Yeah. It's just different dialect. He says, your ways are strange. Your words are somewhat strange, but you do honor to the bird speaker that you would have learned our tongue so quickly.
Will the biggest difficulty Will has speaking Gathite to people that aren't Sulveran is the brevity, because Will wants to talk a lot in this moment, and it's a tribe took me in before I met your bird speaker.
Truly.
They were a tribe that found the ocean's home.
I think one of the storytellers has words of this Gathite living not in our mountains. I would kind of think for a moment. You should speak to Kalatka first, but if you are staying for some time, you might tell me about them.
Will nods in a far more a way you'd nod in common. It says, as your bird speaker and your tribe wishes, and then we'll head. Uber's probably just made it past. Will has full stopped, had a conversation, and Uber's walked 10 feet And like Will just takes one step and is back next to Uba.
You make your way past all these other Gathite who kind of like almost make an impromptu crowd. Like you almost feel like you're walking through a parade or something like that. Just because they're like kind of lined up on the other side, they know where you're going already. Sulveran, you do see the bird speaker's tent. Coming out of it is young Caro, who kind of like regards you with the slightest inclination of their head and the slowest closing of their eyes. But you also see Maraveth, who almost seems like they want to break this sort of almost barrier that's been formed and say something, but holds themselves back in this moment. Both sets of parents are present, although they're kind of looking. They're looking at you up until the moment where you turn to look at them, at which point they kind of look away. But eventually you guys all cross the gap towards the largest tent, which you know must belong to the chieftain. A couple of the Gathite do kind of look at Uba like, what the hell is that thing?
I think when Sulveran doesn't realize how far Uba has fallen behind until he sees where the direction of the gazes of what the hell is that thing like are directed towards, and he could like see that the angle, and he turns a bit to notice. And at that point, whenever young Caro looked at him, he gave them almost the exact same sort of acknowledgement. But he's going to pause very deliberately and wait for Uba, and of course Will, but he waits until Uba draws even with him before he moves forward again, and then slows down with no seeming concern that he's making the chieftain wait a little longer. As he passes Malaveth, I think he's going to just very quietly. Yeah, he does very quietly murmur to the boy soon, and then I think he will he will step to the tent, and just he knows that the chieftain knows that he's there, and waiting to be announced or anything is not something that their people do. So he just ducks to lift the hide and indicates for the others to step in with him.
All of you move into looks like a very small corridor. So you move through one tent flap immediately up to another one, which after you all have entered into this smaller space will be opened up for you, and then you enter into calling it a tent is maybe understating what it is. Like it's very well constructed, and you think like that these panels are kind of pre-made to arrange this. So there's lots of hard edges to everything, and you see a fireplace going on in the middle with just enough space at the top to let out the smoke, but not let out too much heat. Around this is a fire pit with very large stones all right around. There's no snow or even hint of the cold once you enter into this room, but you do see a older looking Gathite man kind of sitting on one stone, looking a little bit pensive. There's a couple some other warriors in the room, people of some import, but there are seats for all of you, just kind of these rough they're basically just rough hewn stones that have some padding on them of furs and pelts and stuff like that arranged around this fireplace. As you walk in, young Caro will enter in after you, as well as a couple other Gathite of various other ranks that you know are important. But they're kind of standing behind you all at the moment. Everybody's kind of waiting for this exchange between you and Kalatka. After a moment, if you don't say anything, Kalatka will look up and say, Sulveran, sit.
Sulveran does so with such immediate obedience. It's not... He doesn't quite collapse to the seat, but he just takes kind of refuge in the command and sits, leans forward, his elbows are on his knees, and he just dips his head at Kalatka.
You have been gone for some months, though long enough. You have missed many things, but you have brought others with you. I would know their names before we speak.
Sulveran just turns to Will and Uba, and he tilts his head slightly at Will, and then he just gives her a nod, allowing her to introduce herself, because that's far more appropriate to his culture than introducing them.
Will, inclines her head in a particularly Gathite manner. And, I assume there's some kind of, when you're in another tribe's presence, but you come from a different tribe, there's a thing that you would say.
Yeah, you would definitely give,
something like, I bring tidings, I am here on behalf of this chieftain.
Mm-hmm.
Or not on behalf, but, I am of this chieftain. So she says something along the lines in common. In Gathite she says it, but the common version is something along the lines of I walk in the tribe of her chieftain was called Sea Splitter. And probably their particular tribal greeting was something about great luck in harvest or something. I don't know. But she says the appropriate things and then says, I am known as Woodwalker.
He inclines his head. You are welcome here, Woodwalker. You do us credit with a greeting of the old ways.
She silently accepts that, as is the Gathite way.
And all eyes fall on the smallest person in this room.
And Sulveran had probably, when he was telling Uba stories, gave Uba a dozen different options for how to go through this. Didn't bother with Will because he knows that Will will figure it out, but gave Uba a bunch of different options, and then very gravely told Uba to be themselves.
I think that Uba's there with Kojin on their shoulder, and they're gonna kind of look panicked for a second because they didn't understand this conversation. Then all of a sudden, everyone just looked at them. So they're gonna very flustered. This is only the second kind of royalty they've ever met, so they try to do the curtsy that they did for the Suthana, but since they're so cold, I would say that the curtsy, it looks like they're in slow motion and it takes them about 10 seconds to complete. But then they kind of look at Sulveran like, was that good?
Sulveran just gives Uba a very slight nod. And then I think, so probably Uba's bewilderment is something that just shows on their face automatically, right?
I would say so, and also I would say that Uba, after that interaction, probably beams like in a very happy, like, oh, okay, I greeted them properly, and then it's like, oh, right, I have to be stoic, and like just immediately like smile off, just kind of standing there very stone still.
That's great. Yeah, Sulveran watched that whole thing. Does Kalatka speak Common? And if he does Sulveran know this?
He does, and you would know that. It's not uncommon for chieftains to speak usually Common and Dwarvish.
That's what I figured. Yeah, and despite the fact that he is pretty certain it's not done, Sulveran looks between Uba, Will, and Kalatka for a moment, and then very deliberately, in Common, introduces Uba, since they didn't say their name or their title, and introduces Uba fully as the lord of their Oasis Keep, and adds on that, just... And Uba speaks Common, and just an expectation that they will continue the rest of the conversation that way.
Your companions are welcome. It seems you have gone down the path of my late child. He pauses for like a long moment. Not for you to say anything, you don't think, but everybody is kind of just like taking a moment to think about Kalasht. Which isn't unusual when you are talking about the dead. Normally there's like some kind of pause like this. But he will continue. Though you have been gone a short time, many things have happened in your absence. It is good that you came into contact with us again. I feared that you might not return. Tell me, why have you come back? Simply to give us these gifts of teachers?
When I offered my gifts, you said you would speak to me.
I did, but that does not mean you have to come back. I could not force you, even had I wished. And you left of your own accord.
When I left, it would have been fitting that you not allow me to return. But when I spoke to you, you asked to speak to me.
Indeed. I ensured that you left in such a way that the option was still open. Though I do not think we would have fooled anybody in the village with this tale of trade.
At the Sulveran shifts, and he's looking at where he'd kept the ring that Kalatka had given him. It was worth far more than trade in the end. I was able to help a clan brother. The silver in your ring. And he nods over to Will. And the intelligence of my compatriots. It was a good gift you gave me.
Good. The reason why I wished to speak with you here, to tell you of two things. The bane of Kalash has not ceased their rampage. They have been seen amongst other tribes, I've been told. The Gathite together sent warriors to defeat them, but the creature ran, hiding we believe, within the mountains, deep in the pits, as is their wont. This would be considered a victory, but for the other thing. In their later battles, they were accompanied by Gathite with purple eyes, those who had died from previous attacks. I regret to say that Kalast was among them. And something else. Unrelated, perhaps, but it seems too unlikely. Some members of different tribes have been afflicted with a madness that progressively grows worse. Some of them have chosen to walk the path of death, but many others simply wait, hoping that it will pass, that they might overcome it before it overcomes them. For these reasons, I have asked to speak with you. He kind of leans back, just waiting.
I think the moment Kalatka started speaking, talking about the fact that the creature was back and that it had descended into the pits, but that wasn't good enough. Sulveran was just so clearly bracing for it. And he holds himself very still when he mentions Kalasht, and then very slowly brings his hand up to slightly cover his mouth the way he's covered some of his tells before with the group. Something that he probably would have never done before with Kalatka. And he's quiet for a long moment after he stops speaking. And instead of directly addressing Kalash and the people that have been turned into some sort of weapon, he brings up Paladin. The madness end in time, they attack their own people. Blood crazed. Insensate.
He just nods.
Then this has been going on for quite some time. The silver ring, we used it. When was it last sighted? The Bane.
Months. Though the tribes are apart, in great need, they can still come quickly to aid one another. We drove it off before too long. But in the weeks thereafter is when we start to see again the faces of those lost. They are not undead, or at least not typical. They are whole, not bodies. They seem to still recognize or understand those who they knew. But they are not friendly.
When we this is a above board question.
Mhm.
When we saw Peladon, he didn't have any sort of purple going on. He just was mad, right?
No, he was just mad, and that's a good point because I don't want to conflate the two. The people coming back from the dead who have purple eyes, the people who are driving mad don't have any visible effect. It's just like their personality.
Got it.
They seem unrelated, but it doesn't make sense to be a coincidence. Like there just doesn't.
Right. Yeah, it's
There's
not a coincidence, but it's not the exact same effect causing it.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be. Well, you wouldn't know that. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah. At this point, Sulveran's looking right at Will because he generally expects Will always has questions, and he's still reeling. He has very little on his mind except for the fact that Kalash is walking under something else's control.
I tried to ask in the chat, but Sarah is not available.
Yeah, I think that
because which is fair. Like they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was asking if because Will was looking after the little baby troops that day.
Mm-hmm.
Would Medea have told Will about that?
I can't think of a reason why not. And I definitely remember them saying that they would told you guys about what that little adventure. So
okay,
I don't see a reason why
not. Will says one of our other companions in the deserts said that they fought an ancient hero of the Chonag with purple eyes. One known to history that had been brought and used as a weapon.
Ill tidings.
I think Will is thinking. Will know a lot about most of what they just talked about. I think, even with how close Will and Sulveran is, Will is not, ever pried into, Sulveran's past and stuff, and says, did the madness start at a similar time in all those afflicted?
You guys can also all roll me Arcana checks, but Galactica will say no. Each time it was not long after the creature, demon, I believe, visited the tribe.
Sulveran and Will collectively got 30 for Arcana.
I like how you put that instead of Sulveran knows nothing.
So Will, I mean, based on the descriptions, he's made it very clear these are not like skeletons, zombies. They're not ghosts either. Like from what he's saying, though, short of phrase though he is, it seems very clear that these are like physical beings. Other than the eyes, they seem to be people. But you also seem to understand that, from what you know about Gathite culture and everything, they would have taken the bodies and done something with them. So there is a bit of an advanced, probably some kind of necromancy, but very advanced kinds of magic going on here to make this happen. And with a 26, you suspect it has something to do with the capturing of souls. That seems to be the only way in your mind that these people would be risen back from the dead and seem to retain some memory and some personality, but not have any control over themselves, because they're clearly not just resurrected. So that's kind of what runs through your mind as you're listening to this.
Will takes in the information about the fact that the demon seems to be directly sparedness to an extent, and then does that very quick putting of stuff together in her head and says, for the ancient barbarian that our companion dealt with, it was plausible that body had been covered and then resurrected. That is less plausible, if I am remembering correctly, how you deal with death. So there has to be... Sorry. Will stop for Sulveran when Sulveran makes the say something motion.
Yeah, Sulveran just kind of like faintly grunts as Will is speaking, and I never found her. And he's got a hand on his alpenstock as he says this. I never found her, he repeats, and looks to Kalaka. The others? Were they given rights? And he's nodding back to Will because her assumption is correct. There should not be enough of a body to raise.
Many were missing, galoshed. Some had their bodies recovered, but only much later. It were resurrection, then a very powerful one indeed to bring them back with so little.
It occurs to me that it's likely necromancy that's affecting the soul of the creature more than reanimating them as a person.
All victims were slain by the creature itself. Those who died to the purple eyes do not come back as such.
Have there been any others that suffered as Kalash has that are waiting?
From our tribe, few. We have seen 2 others besides. Warriors who fought with Kalash. Other tribes have had less luck in this regard.
The correct honorific for collector is chieftain, right?
Yeah, in common, that's what you would say. There's a very specific word in Gathite, but we won't worry.
Will probably speaks common except for to say the proper word in Gathite.
Okay.
And says, if you will indulge me casting a spell, chieftain, I can reach out to some more knowledgeable than I, maybe.
Do as you please.
Will incline to head, and I'll cast Sending to Aracondas.
Okay.
And ask about I'll say Gathite troubles purple-eyed soul necromancy at large. Also spreading madness akin to Pelagons.
Okay. Doesn't take very long before you get a reply. I don't remember the voice. That's so long. It sounds as though the work of the Dark One, Saliel, will inquire more into this. Sulveran should be able to cure Pelagon interested.
Will says to Sulveran, Aracondis suggests, well, to the room, but direct it to Sulveran. Aracondis suggests that it's the work of Saliel, as all things that we seem to be dealing with of late are. and that the madness, if it is akin to your clan brother, is curable by you, as it was then. And if you can, maybe we can spread that ritual and ceremony to help those afflicted.
Sulveran just nods gravely, and then, almost lightening up a bit, but not quite, he turns to Uba and reminds them, with your help, as usual.
I think that Uba looks very concerned at the idea of resurrected Gathites, but will try to put on a brave face and again nod stoically, trying to imitate the other Gathite.
Sulveran turns back and says, it is as she says. We will heal who we can, teach what we may, and before ere long, I will lay your daughter to rest, Kalatka, and the rest as well.
He nods. You should speak with Meraveth and young Kuro. They have taken up your duties.
Sulveran has lots of things to say about the fact that he had hoped there would be different things for Meraveth, but he just nods very shortly. As I will. And this is all you have for me?
Yes. Only that and the thanks of the tribe for returning. You will be not as welcomed as one of our own, but you now are something new for Gathite. A half-exile. Not
I think
among
as
us or apart.
I think as he says this, a half-exile, not among us or apart, Sulveran belatedly remembers that he has switched out of his armor. It was all he could think about on the way up, and when he was in the foothills, and then he walked into the camp and could not think about anything other than the fact that he needed to keep the most Gathite faces on. And now that he's been called one and apart, he remembers that he's wearing the mithril again.
Just beautifully elven crafted chain mithril.
Yes. Fair enough. And you are still my chieftain, though I follow other trails. And at this, he looks just very directly at Will, before he just stands because the conversation is clearly over. Rolls the shoulders out and nods at the other guards as he goes to see to young Caro and Meraveth.
Will leave and collect Uba and be like, it's our time to go.
That's our cue. Yeah, you exit the tent. Young Carol will follow you swiftly out as well.
And for the audience, may I say that young Caro is still quite elderly.
Young Caro is quite old, actually. Even older than Kalatka, in fact. This fairly ancient-looking Gathite, moves their way out of this tent. The tribe is, as you left them, has not moved, and could, for anybody else's eyes, have been statues this whole time. But once you exit, and they have not heard anything bad, they immediately break off to go do whatever they were doing. Not quickly, not slowly, as though they were never even waiting for anything.
Sulveran is looking to where he had last seen all of his parents.
The four of them are still standing there. They glance over at you, seeing you seemingly... What's the look on Sulveran's face, if there is one?
It's not so much in his face as it is slightly in his posture. He is shorter than 3 out of his 4 parents, and he is just taller than only one of the women. But his head is kind of ducked, as though he's expecting to be cuffed at the back of the head. His kind of arms are a little bit... His hands are like... One hand is covering the other, gloved and mail. And he's just kind of waiting, kind of looking up just a little bit to see if they're looking at him or if they've looked away like they did before. He has instantly de-aged a few years, but it is not in a hug.
Yeah, so the first person who breaks this sort of standoff between the two of you of who's going to blink is Delmera, your birth mother, as she slowly, almost carefully, begins to make their way over, not fully to you, but just halfway in the space between.
Sulveran just exhales very deeply and then meets her the rest of the way. And he looks back over his shoulder and he just indicates that they might as well come because this is going to be awkward regardless. Might as well just finish it out now.
I think Will kind of walks Uber towards them, but at a distance that they are still clearly now just a closer interested audience. Will does not have, after what Will just went through, like an enormous amount of sympathy for other people like having to deal with coming home.
Your mother looks at you, trying to get a feel for you. She will eventually pull you in, not almost mirroring the embrace that Will had with Feed, but in opposites. This is not the hug between a child and their parent. This is the hug between, two adults. It is like around you fully. And though there's not very much emotion betrayed on their face, there is a steel within this grip. And Delmera will stay quietly so that only you can hear. I sense now that you are not lost to us, but you will not be staying.
Sulveran, it's almost visible from the outside that he is swallowing, his jaw has locked, and then he just sort of jerkily nods, still holding her. He leans back a little, just enough to kind of look her over, and then at the same time look the others over before turning his focus fully to Delmera, who he can't quite remember the last time they shared a hug like this, even though he's only been gone for 4 months. I will not. But, Mordain willing, I will return again.
There are then the quiet tears, not a sobbing, but not even very much emotion betrayed on the face, but they just begin to roll steadily down the cheeks. They nod. And after a moment, they'll release you. You are welcome, always, in the tent.
Sulveran sort of pauses for a moment because he's used to having, and then he realizes that he's in the cold, he's wearing his furs, and he brings this up to very gingerly, very placidly pat at the tears on her face before they can freeze to her skin or her eyelashes. I know, Mother. I do know. And then he's going to turn to the others. He's
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Will and Uba, you can both make me insight checks if you like.
We'll see if Uba or Will can get the... Oh!
I like
Oh,
games
I should
when
have clicked
roll
on
good.
insight.
That's okay.
That would be +2. That's a 19.
It's a 19, okay. You both...
Everyone's seen Sulveran's entire life story.
You both are, in this moment, aware of a web of relationship going on here. So, based off everything about them, these 4 people are Sulveran's parents. But 2 of them are their parents. You know that you can just tell just by like something about this body language. You've spent enough time with Sulveran. You've just learned enough about Gathite. You know that Delmera is their birth mother, and of the 2 men, there is sorry, I'm just making sure I get the description right.
Consulting this complicated family tree.
One of them is slightly more well dressed, and he has like the hands of a skilled workman, and the facial features, like the very same nose that Sulveran has. That man is their birth father, but the other pair are both. They're still as parental towards Sulveran. They still have that same intonation. But they do not look like Sulveran. You don't think they're directly related. However, you can tell that the 2 men are together and the 2 women are together in the sense that I think you understand. So you take this all in this moment.
This is a thing that's not that unusual among Gathite, right?
It's certainly not unheard of. The circumstances around it are a little bit unusual, but yeah.
Well, just like, oh yeah, another of these Gathite like tribal things that if you try and convert that into common, like you put that into a city, people are going to have questions, but here it's just the way things are.
Yeah, Uba's like incredibly confused, but it's like, I guess that's how Gathite are.
Must take 4 people to make a baby.
Uber's thinking about like how the egg carrying works for like Gathite. Yeah, I think Will kind of inclines her head to the whole parental group of like greeting, but doesn't really interject, and just files all that away in her mind palace, which is a mind ship.
Sulveran takes the moment to very with a sense of pride that's obvious even to Uba. These are my friends. This is Will, and this is Uba.
They do not speak common. Your birth father does, but the other ones don't. So, I want to double check. I gotta remember their which one's which. These names. Yes.
Sorry.
So, Lanak,
But I gave them different names.
you did give them very different names. Lanak will say to the two of you, greetings. It is uncommon for us to receive such a large party of outsiders, visitors, as it were. But you have come with our child. You too will be welcome in the tent, so long as you stay here.
Will, that was the one that speaks common.
Yes.
Will responds in Gathite. We thank you for your hospitality and sharing your tent. And then, like, very quickly murmurs in common to Uber that is what she said. Because now that they're not in a meeting with the chieftain, Will is happy to translate most Gathite for Uber.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that Uba is. I'm assuming that these Gathite are at least 3 times Uba's height, so Uba's kind of
I think it
looking
might be
up like
more than
this and
that.
says, "Thank you for allowing us to stay with you," and then does another very brief curtsy out of politeness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 3 of these Gathite are still taller than Sulveran.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Rick's
I
not that
think-
tall actually in this crowd.
Yeah, and I think the entire other times that they've been around, like Sulveran has kind of like hid the slight smugness he gets every time Will retorts to people right in Gathite, but this time he's got that look of satisfaction on his face as the human comes in and speaks Gathite just as well as any of the rest of them.
Found another weirdo. I found this weirdo that speaks Gathite.
Look at this precious captain I found.
It's actually Lady Captain now. Just a reminder, there's Lady Captain.
Captain Lady.
You see Arenic's eyebrow, so it's totally like raised. But Valanath will say to Sulveran and Gathite, we should talk more later. You have young Caro to attend to.
Sulveran, just at the reminder that she is still being called young Caro, just nods. And Mariveth, I thought, and at this point he looks to Lanak, I thought he was going to apprentice under one of you. They said to me that he's filling my shoes.
Maribeth chose.
Sulveran's just like completely poleaxed for that.
Will translated that and is like, you have to understand that the 2 words in common don't. There's a lot of intonation that I can't translate.
Uba's kind of standing there. Like when you talk to a dog and like the dog acts like they understand, but they don't. Like all the meaning just goes right over their head. That's Uba right now.
Like that Will and Uba have a +2 difference in insight, but this session in particular, we're playing it as if they are the absolute opposite.
Hard. Like Uba has a disadvantage here for sure.
Yeah.
Look,
you can't even see people's mouths. You just see the bottom of their jaws from your height. That's the problem.
I'm just looking at everyone's chins. I don't quite know who's talking.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was like, all the insight in the world doesn't help you when you're trying to intone body expressions from the knees.
Yeah, that's true. Uba can't see any of their facial expressions, so.
Furs.
I just have to believe you about that, Charlie.
It's true. I think. Oh. So I have Uba life experience. So yeah, Sulveran just stares at them. You are right. This is talk for later. And turns. Assuming that young Caro has not gone too far, he starts glancing around for both her and...
They're waiting in front of your old tent, the bird speaker's tent.
Yeah, so in that case, he gestures Uba to like follow right in his wake, because even though the camp is kept mostly clear of snow for Gathite, like the height of what is easily traversable for a Gathite is just different. And so he keeps Uba in his wake to make that treading easier. And stalls briefly looking at the tent, and you might notice that it looks precisely like the tent that he makes appear with his Leoman's tiny hut when he has brought y'all into that shelter. That's like this, except for this is not a perfect dome that is slightly glowy.
As you enter into it, it is much the same as if you had never left. Like any of the things that you left behind have been arranged in the way that you usually arrange it. You know, there's other things in here that are not yours, some new things. But other than that, it doesn't seem that different to you. Young Caro, who again is very old, probably about as old as Gathite get. This person looks, they look like an 80-year-old or so. Gathite aged similarly to humans. So
They usually don't make it 80.
Their back is quite bowed, and they do have a large cane walking stick that they like rest on a lot of times. And next to them is a Gathite that noticeably is missing one eye. Not missing one eye. One eye is glassed over. Not in the normal Gathite way, but with blindness in their eye. They are also missing several fingers on their left hand. Maribeth, as you enter in, will say to you, Sulveran, welcome. Been some months.
Sulveran just waits him out, is just looking him over, seeing how well he's like been eating. Kind of the glance that he gives him is at once the kind of look that you give when you've missed somebody, but it also has a little bit of the healer's, you've been treated right sort of look, looking for injuries, untended, signs of poor nutrition.
They definitely seem older than when you left them, although it's only been a few months. Uba probably has no concept of this, but Will can tell that Maribeth is probably on the younger side, like late teens. They'll say, I have been well. It has been difficult at times without you.
Yes. You chose. And he just gestures at the tent and looks at the boy again.
I asked this of old Caro. It was needed.
It was brave of you. Especially now, I sense, with what the chieftain has told me of our people.
Perhaps I realized once you left that looks over at his hand. This was a good spot for.
It has always been a good spot for those of us that are a little. He just looks to the door of the tent and then back. Who don't quite fit. You learned well. Kalatka would not have given you the role had you not learned well. And I think At that point, Sulveran just kind of finds a place to sort of plop into the ground. Like he just sort of settles all his weight down and looks from young Caro to Maribeth again. And we're gonna have to change that name because I didn't anticipate how much like Maribeth it would sound whenever we said it in session.
I think we're not as intoning the as much. It's Maribeth
Yeah,
with a V,
but
but it
this is
does
just
kind
happening.
of get subsumed into the rest.
Yeah. So
as you guys are talking, young Caro looks at you and says, "Young ones, much talk, better teach."
Sulveran just
Ailing ones outside.
Sulveran looks at Uma and he looks at Will and young Caro is one of the truest of our kind. And he will bring Will over because Will knows a lot about it too. And then settle them so that he can explain the process to young Caro, but not guide her as much because she's familiar with most things. But he is going to ask Maribeth to explain his what he basically wants him to model what he's been doing lately. He wants to see how he's grown in the last few months to know what he's working with when he starts to teach him.
Okay. Yeah, he will show you basically some of the spells he's capable of casting. He's essentially like a first level cleric at this point. So they can do a little bit of healing, stuff like that. They are capable of casting ceremony, which is important because that's kind of the first step in how you guys cured Pelagon. However, the final removal of the curse will probably have to be done by someone else. Probably one of the you or one of the clerics that you brought with you. Young Caro. Old Caro's dead. Young Caro is capable of doing the ceremony parts, but they were never a particularly high spell caster. They are more of a medicine person. So the rest of it they will also need.
Yeah, so in that case, instead of automatically deferring to Will for explanations and teaching, while he does pause and wait for her to interject or provide more information, he sits down and he models with just a little bit of snow to take the place of the silver. You will need powdered silver for this, of course. Will teach you how to build a device, or perhaps we will leave some devices with you for powdering the silver more easily. And as he's teaching, he just keeps looking over to young Caro because he really just wants to ask Maribeth how he's doing. But young Caro's gaze makes it impossible to do so. And so he kind of substitutes that with occasionally reaching out and adjusting a grip where he perhaps doesn't, where he perhaps could just explain it.
If
Yes.
hang on, I'll just roll this inside check. But while young Caro while the actual young person in this tent is showing Sulveran the magic as well, Will is like slightly like being like, you could enunciate this better, and it would slightly increase the potential potency of the spell. Like she's like comfortable to give divine casters advice, but does not notice that you seem to want some alone time, and thusly will not help facilitate that.
Young Caro will say to Will in Gathite, "Human, many word. Speak better, fine."
Will's like, thinks and tries to pass that, and it's just like Spun's I think whatever the appropriate honorific for an older person is, yes, that honorific in Gathite. But is also already probably while interjecting as Sulveran is teaching stuff, will interject if it's necessary. But it's already like setting up on a piece of paper like a schematic to make out of bone, like a motion-based powdering silver thing. So just need this, like these two bones of the anatomy. Like you can probably go with that.
While this is being explained, Ian Kara seems to be mixing together some kind of tea of some kind. We'll pour several cups out, handing the first one to Uba, saying, "Maul, bro," giving you the tea.
I think that Uba isn't quite sure what that means, so they're going to like very slowly, not only because they're cold, but because they're confused, like slowly start raising the cup to their lips while also glancing at Sulveran, like, is this something I actually drink?
Sulveran just gives Uba the tiniest, the most discreet of nods. And his lips are definitely twitching. Like, he had not imagined the joy of introducing Uba to young Caro. And now he's getting to see it, and it's exactly what he would have predicted.
Okay. If that's the case, then Uba is going to actually drink the tea. I don't know what it does, but yeah.
Just tea.
You grow 6 inches immediately.
It is the enlarged smell.
It does warm you quite pleasantly. It doesn't taste as good as you might hope. There's no sugar in it whatsoever. But it tastes a little bit, like it's medicinal tea. It's not necessarily for the taste that you're drinking this.
I think as soon as Uba like took a drink of the tea, their like tail very briefly like twitched, because it tasted so bad. But then once they start to warm up, they relax a little bit more, and their tail kind of just goes back and forth. They're happy that they're actually warm now.
Roll a d100.
But okay.
And every time you get to roll a D100, like it's a good moment.
It is.
Uba gets a wild magic surge.
It's always fun.
Sometime weeks later, though Uba might be full grown, they gain a centimeter.
Excellent.
Centimeter.
Nobody notices except for Will.
Yeah. Will walks out one day and everything is slightly off, and it's just like, oh, that can't be right. Keller must be taller. Keller's grown a foot. Like,
Everybody else has shrunk by exactly 1 centimeter.
Eventually, old Caro will leave to begin prepping the stuff needed to do the ceremony on. There's not that many afflicted in your tribe, just a couple people, but they've been a little bit kept away. They don't seem as far gone as Pelagon even, but they do still, like, the first time you're introduced to them, they have that vacancy of eyes that Pelagon had, especially before you did the ceremony. So you have some time alone to speak with Maribeth.
Sulveran just kind of it's almost like that expression that somebody gets when a guard leaves, or a stern parental figure exits the room. He relaxes a moment after she's gone, waits 1, 2, 3 long heartbeats, and then turns back to Maribeth, and his voice is not much warmer, but it is still very different from when young Caro was in the room. I am pleased to see you, young one.
As well, um, I have something for you. And he kind of reaches down and pulls aside some different furs that he kind of like. It's like a bundle, like wrapped up, like kind of like a knife roll or something like that, wrapped up. He unfurls it, and you see before you an alpenstock. But it's an alpenstock that you know very well. This is Kalash's alpenstock.
Uh,
I found it only about a month ago as we were walking down the mountain. Kalatka said it was not his to have. I think it should be yours.
Sulveran's silent for a very long moment, and he's just sitting there. He's got the alpenstock laid out in his lap. And he very slightly, like, he's hesitating for a moment, but then he just looks up, fixes his gaze square on the boy's face, and smiles at him. It is very deliberate. It's not. It's almost there's almost something unnatural about it, like he had to think to do it. This is good because now we can trade, and I will not be left without a weapon. It is time for you to carry this one, I think. And he places his palm to the one that he had inherited from Old Caro. And it does still take him a breath to remove it, to take the specific holster that he uses the leather band that he uses to keep it against his side. And mail, if you are ready. And he sort of indicates the fact that he is no longer wearing his old bone mail.
You would have me fully take your place then?
You chose.
I chose. I'll put one hand on the alpenstock and like feel the weight in his good hand as he does so.
Sulveran's going to reach for his bag, and very painstakingly he has packed away the mail, which, unlike plate mail, cannot be completely taken apart. It's bound together with leather and straps, but he has kept it very carefully. He's kept after it even as though it's sat in his bag. You can have this repaired, brought down to your size, and he sort of looks him over. But I do not think you will need it to stay so small for so long.
Thank you.
The Gathite word chose after this is going to, like,
Uber, Will, and Sulveran are going to have an inside joke about just saying that people chose things.
You're like, pass somebody like a biscuit.
Someone is full dead, and we'll just like, they chose.
I think with that, I will end with. I think we're gonna wrap up here, just because I feel like we've done we've hit the core of what I wanted to do here. But I will end with you when you go to take Kalash's alpenstock. You touch it, and there's like an electricity that is not just you touching this or taking up your your oath sister's object. There is some magic that has been imparted to this object that was not there before. You will probably, you think you're going to have to get this, identify it, or spend some time with it to figure out what the nature of this magic is. But you all will spend, I think, at least a couple days here, while the Elcar will begin to heal the two Gathite in this tribe. But then your tribe will also send runners out to tell them, like, we have people who can heal your sick if you bring them to us. Or, we can try to send them to you if you can't move them. And the Elcar will begin to trade. All of the Gathite, while you guys are staying with them, are very polite, but they definitely maintain a certain amount of distance from you all. Even Sulveran, they kind of... It's hard because they do have a familiarity with you, but they recognize that your place is like a bit different. That probably this would not be the reception you would get in another tribe. To most other tribes, you would probably still be considered like persona non grata, so to speak. But that kind of happens as we wrap this up. And if we need to do any other scenes in the camp that you guys think about, we'll probably pick those up at the start of next session before you guys come back together.
All I want to do is see next time Uber meets some children.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to happen on screen, but I think if they do like Gathite campfires and that person is will offer to tell a story of the Sea Tribe.
Okay. Probably we'll do a little bit of this at the start of next session as well, because I think it will roll into everybody coming back together. All right. Well, that was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I like being able to play Gathite. It's always fun. Thanks everybody for coming out to watch. We will be back again tomorrow to play the main game. I'm very excited for. Hope to see you all then. But we're out for now.